Welcome back to another video. My name is Akil. If you don't know who I am, my ultimate goal is to expand our understanding of the universe. My current objective is to expand the scope and scale of productivity within the or by using the company of Adara. Right now, we help with a lead follow-up for small to medium-sized businesses. And so basically, we're going to go over, obviously, as usual, everything that happened since the last video. There's a lot that's been happening. I currently have 0 clients. I've been doing DMs, like DMing gyms all day. We talked about it last time. And then we're also going to talk about a bunch of other tangential stuff, like some things I realized. So enough with the talk. Let's get on to the video. Well, I guess the entire video is talking, but anyway, let's get on to the actual topics of the video. All right, so basically last time, I know we ended off where I was like considering DMing or whatever, and I was like still running the ads and all that shit. And I had 2 clients at the time, but one was canceling. Well, like I was thinking, the other client ended up canceling. Because I kind of also saw the writing on the wall. Like I said, they just weren't getting that many leads, and most of the leads that they were getting were spam. So I kind of see the writing on the wall. So yeah, they ended up canceling. So now I currently have 0 clients, 0. So it kind of feels like I'm back to square one. But at the end of the day, that's all good. But let's just go over like the broad things I guess that happened. Basically, I've been back to DMs, right? I've been back to DMs. So since then. Of course, I lost both of the clients. And then, I did the upgrade to the opportunities tab. So the opportunities tab is done. Obviously, I have no clients, so it doesn't really matter. But, the opportunity tab, that only took like a day. So I did that. I've just been working on, mainly since then, it's been DMs, obviously follow-ups from the leads that come from the DMs, and then also just editing shorts whenever I get the free time so that I can keep adding to my, adding to the back end of what do you call it? Like how I scheduled a bunch of posts out for like 6 months, just continually adding more posts onto that. But anyway, I guess specifically, honestly, like I could do it day by day, but most of it is just going to be DMs. Like honestly, the entire thing is just going to be mainly just DMs since the last time to now. Every single day I've been trying to hit about 200 to 300 DMs. The last couple of weeks, it's just been 300 DMs. So nothing particularly special. But there is a bunch of things I realized and things I kind of not changed, maybe. Well, I guess, yeah, altered about my perception of the business, especially in the last few days. I did like some backwards looking. I was like, okay, what can we do to make sure that we're set correctly? And yeah, I can start talking about these kind of the broad things I did. One thing I did that is not related to that is I did this thing called IVR. I noticed I was getting a lot of spam calls. IVR basically just makes it so that like when they call my business number, they have to click like, please click 1 to connect. So that actually stops like a ton of spam. Super easy fix. I just thought I'd add that because I feel like a lot of the businesses, the small businesses that I work with, they get a ton of spam. They could easily just add that. And then essentially they'll never get spam again because, any human will just be able to click 1 real quick. And then any non-human will obviously not, it's spam anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, back to the point. A couple broad things. So basically, I was kind of doing like a backwards analysis. Okay, I was like, looking at the ads, right? Because I know we're running the ads, and yes, so I did a couple different targeting. I targeted one that was gym specific ads, spa specific ads, and those ads they're really good. Like they get leads exactly on the money, like the exact type of leads I'm looking for. Like they get exactly spa owner leads and exactly gym owner leads. The real main issue is just that no matter what ad I've tried, it is just too expensive. Like they do turn into trials, and I'm sure with enough trials they'll turn into clients, but it's just too expensive. Like it costs me maybe like $1,000 per trial basically, because it costs like $150 per lead. Out of the leads, like out of like maybe 5 or 6 leads, only 1 turns into a trial. So basically it's costing me about $1,000 per trial, and it'll probably, if it takes 2 to 3 trials, then it'll cost me like $3,000 per booked appointment, or more, maybe even $5,000 per booked per actual, not booked, sorry, for actual paying client. So that's just too expensive for my current stage, honestly. So I kind of just made the calculation. I was like, okay, I could keep spending money on ads like $50, $60, or $90 a day. But honestly, at the end of the day, that's really not a smart financial move. What's more smart, it's just like, it's a little too far ahead for me to start doing that. I learned a lot from the ads. I realized that gyms specifically and spas specifically are the best. I also, kind of adjusted the way I communicate with the leads. Also the way I communicate on a sales call. I go straight to a demo call now. There's obviously things have changed about the sales process from the ads, so it was definitely a really good investment. I spent like $7 or $8 grand total on ads so far, and I've learned a shit ton, and it's super worth it. But right now, continuing the ads has honestly, in my opinion, depreciating returns. Um, Especially if I don't have any clients right now, it doesn't really make much sense to start running ads instead of just doing DMs, right? Because like right now, let's just say I cut out ads. I basically cut out almost all of the burn rate, right? It only cost me like $300 or $400 a month, really, for like all like the go high level, and then the email that I have, and then some of the other stuff, like the small stuff that I have to just keep the basically business running. It only costs like $400 to maybe $500 max per month if I include like one-time random expenses. So right now it's with ads. If I'm spending $60 a day, it's like $1,800. So it's close to like $2,500 every month that I have to have if I'm spending with ads. But if I already know that it costs me like $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever, $5,000 potentially per paying client, that would mean I'd have to spend multiple months worth of, I'd have to be spending for months just to get one client. In which case, it's honestly not that smart to just do that. It's much smarter, like I said, just to keep the burn rate super low. Once I get one client, I'm break even already, or more than break even. I'm already in a profit. And then from there, I can scale up. Once I get multiple paying clients, then I can start the ads again. It's not like I'm permanently stopping ads. I'm just putting a pause on it until I can get free cash flow. I kind of want the business to stand up on its own 2 feet. I feel like I spent enough money in terms of like learning like random stuff, and ads specifically are a bit too expensive for my stage. So in the ad sector, specifically ads, I'm turning them off. I'm just going to be focusing on DMs, and obviously, after my 300 DMs a day, I do the organic either editing of shorts or filming more shorts or whatever it is. But yeah, that's basically kind of where I'm at there. As far as I realized also one more thing, and that is right now. So I was listening to like Alex Hormozi, and he was talking about like service businesses, and something that I realized was that he was explaining how, especially for small businesses, the $1,000 to $3,000 price point is essentially like the dead zone in terms of like it's the zone where you're going to have the highest churn, and it's also the zone where you're going to have the worst types of clients, basically, because it's gonna be like small to medium businesses. So they're like, you could do a perfect job, but because their business is just they're so mismanaged and they kind of want to keep constantly changing things, even if you do a perfect job, they'll still end up churning out. And for them, $1,000 feels extremely expensive. Even though that you're providing a lot of value, they don't have like the actual systems in place to see or understand that value that you provide. So usually for small businesses specifically, he said, the $400 to $500 price range is kind of the ideal price range, and then or you should go to bigger businesses with like $5,000 or $6,000 a month or more, and those are kind of like the better places, because big businesses they're able to understand what you do and the value you provide, and they make decisions primarily based on numbers and reality rather than just kind of based on feel, which a lot of small business owners definitely do. And on the lower price point, if you're only at $450 to $500 or something like that, people are less likely to churn because the businesses are just they don't feel as like it's as big of an expense, right? It's a smaller expense, so they don't feel the smaller businesses don't feel like as emotional towards it. But anyway, what does that mean for me practically? What that means for me practically is I'm going to be not stopping, but I'm going to be altering the way I'm approaching this, right? Because obviously the end goal is always obviously to go to bigger businesses, right? The goal is not, there's two, basically that puts me in like two paths. Obviously, if I know that where I'm at is the highest churn, it doesn't really, obviously my plan was never to stick to small businesses specifically. My plan was always to try to capture a bigger monthly price for a bigger business. But my thoughts are like, it's physically impossible for me to do that without having a few concurrent clients first. Like I can't approach franchises, or I can't approach bigger gyms or bigger spas that get hundreds of leads per month or per week without first having like concurrent clients that I can show with a VA hired, so I can show like, hey, these are the recordings, this is a current live dashboard of multiple of my clients. Here's how we maintain quality, all of that. Then I can actually like show that to a bigger spa, and they'll be able to trust me, or a bigger gym, and they'll be able to trust me. Right now, if I reach out to a bigger gym, they're gonna be like, okay, what can you do for us? And it'll just be me doing, I have to show them a dashboard of me doing it, and it's much, much less likely that they'll be okay with doing that. Especially if I plan to hire it over to a VA in the future, it's not gonna be easy to do a sales cycle like that. So that leaves me if my goal is obviously bigger clients, I could also theoretically do smaller clients where I just dilute the service. So basically I reduce the amount of human touches and human calls to maybe just one, and most of it is just going to be the automations or AI messaging or whatever it is. I don't want to do that. I feel like that dilutes the brand as well, and it's not as productive as going to help bigger companies with the same problem, just in a better way. So what that means basically practically is that I'm just going to basically lower the prices right now, meaning for any client that tries to sign up, I'll just start anchoring at like $750 or $795, and then we're going to get to a trial, and then after the trial, if they're like, yes, we really like it, but we want the price to be a little bit lower, I'll be willing to go down up to about $500 a month. See what I'm saying? And that way, it's not as expensive, or if they're about to churn, I'll be willing to go down to $500 a month just because I want to have concurrent clients. Because in the future, a big client is not going to ask how much a smaller client is paying. That doesn't matter. All right, they just care that you have multiple concurrent clients and that the VA is like a VA is doing it, and the quality is there and the metrics are there and all of that. So point is, that's kind of what I think about right now. So right now the point is just to get clients, not necessarily to have the maximized margin. I think I kind of jumped the gun a bit by raising the price to $995. It's fine. I learned it wasn't a bad decision. It was definitely a good decision. But yeah, I'm gonna go back to about like 500, 600 a month, 700 a month, and yeah, I'm gonna just my main goal is just to get concurrent clients and not have. I mean, even obviously there's gonna be a level of churn, but that's just life. My goal is just to get concurrent clients, even if it's just a break even, right? Because right now at $500 a month, if I hire a VA, that's a break even. The VA costs about maybe $250 to $300 a month per spa. And then obviously the other costs, there's gonna be like text message costs, phone number costs. There's a monthly cost to have open A2P open on every account. There's a bunch of many costs that'll add up. So it'll probably be about the net cost for a spa will probably be like 400, 420. And I'll probably be getting 500. So out of everything, once everything is said and done, if I'm paying out 500 with the fixed cost too, that's just for one spa, but fixed costs I have $300 a month and all that shit. So yeah, when you even everything out, if I have like 3 or 4 spas at $500, it'll just be a net break even. The entire business will be a break even, but that's okay because the goal is to have those clients concurrently so I can get bigger clients. So that's kind of the plan right now. I know that kind of changed from before, but I was just kind of analyzing it. And not every time something is not working, that means something needs to be changed. Sometimes things just need time. But I was just analyzing it, and I think that's just the best way to accelerate my growth and learning without obviously stalling. Because if I keep the price at 1,000, it might take years for me to get quality clients. And I don't think that's productive in any meaningful way. So lowering the price is, in my opinion, productive. Because it's a stepping stone. My plan is not to make the price $500 permanently. My plan is just to step there, get those clients, use that live database of multiple clients with a VA hired in order to get to the next level. That's kind of just the goal. But other than that, that's kind of just where I'm at in terms of as far as like everything so far. Yeah, the main thing has just been, obviously, the DMs are exceptionally like before, are exceptionally, boring, basically. And I just have to constantly, every single day, do 300 DMs, and I'm doing it manually, obviously. So, yeah, it just takes time. And I know it's going to take months. But the good news, the upside is that gyms so far have been pretty good. As in, like, the response rate has been slightly higher than spas from the gyms. Like, from every 300 I send out, I've been getting, from every 600, I probably get one or two responses. Whereas in spas, it might have been every 900, I get only 1 or 2 responses. So I'd say gyms are slightly better as far as response rate. I already have one guy, he said he's interested in a trial. I'm not sure yet. He sent me some business information, but not everything yet. So we'll see if he ends up doing a trial. But other than that, trial-wise, still waiting. I got other leads in the pipeline, but none of them have turned into anything. So can you really call them leads in the pipeline? Not really. They're just people I follow up with as well. So nothing else in the pipeline. There might be one trial coming up. I'm not sure yet. But other than that, the main thing is just DMs. I'm hitting out the 300 a day. Another thing that happened that was really interesting, I forgot to mention, was a med spa consultant with multiple spas. Actually, so this is like a lady who does consulting for multiple med spa owners. So she basically like gives them advice, recommends them services, stuff like that, so they can grow their med spa. She actually ended up responding to one of my ads, and I had a phone call conversation with her, and I thought that was actually pretty interesting. She actually was interested in the service for whatever reason. I haven't heard from her since. I've been following up consistently, but yeah, I had one caller with her. She said she's really interested. She wants to start a trial, and then just blank. I haven't heard shit, but that's how leads sometimes are. But The main thing that I learned from that is that I can actually start DMing med spa consultants too, and gym consultants too. Not necessarily like big companies that do it, but just individuals. And they might know like 3, 5, maybe 10 med spas. And if I contact them, I can say, hey, I'll give you a referral fee. Maybe if you help me get signed up with a spa at $750 a month, I'll give you $200 a month or something for however long they stay, or up to 6 months of them staying, or something that incentivizes them to recommend me. And that way, again, the goal is just to get 4 to 5 concurrent clients so that I can use that to then show a bigger client. Like the goal is just to use that to get a bigger client, and the bigger client might be paying 3 to 5 grand a month. And I'll be hiring like a VA. I'll do it myself at the start, and then hire a VA, and then what I'm saying, that's the goal. But yeah, it's just a stepping stone. But yeah, the med spa. So between right now, the main engine is going to be DMs, right? Because I'm starting off the ads by June 2nd. So that's in like what? Today's May 30th, so like 3 days. So I'm shutting off the ads in 3 days. The reason I wanted to do the last 3 days, I wanted to test one last thing, which was just like testing the ads, not just in California, but all over the country. I tested it for like 7 days. I just wanted to finish it off for like a few more days. But yeah, that's the final test. I'm switching off the ads June 2nd. But after that, main thing is just DMs, right? I'm going to be hitting 300 DMs a day. And right now, I'm probably about like maybe 3 to 4,000 DMs for the gyms already. I can't remember. Maybe it's 2 to 3,000. But I'm in the multi-thousand DMs number for the gyms right now. And I feel like, and I'm pretty much, maybe I'd say like 35% to maybe 40% done with the US. So that means I obviously got like another month maybe of gym, maybe 3 weeks of gyms left. But after that, I can start DMing med spa consultants, gym consultants. I can start DMing wellness centers like the IV drip, stuff like that. So I have maybe a couple months more of leg room of DMs. And after that, I can always do my old website form idea where I do spas and gyms, but instead of DMing them, I just go onto their website and then reach out through the contact form. So that's one option. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to put in. I'm just gonna have to put in more work. Obviously, less. What do you call it? No money, but work. I'm just gonna have to put in the old cold outbound work that I've been doing in real estate. I did at the start of this, and I had to continue doing it again. It's exceptionally boring, but hey, it gets the job done, and it's cheap, right? This is free. For me to send DMs, it just takes a shitload of time. It takes like 3 hours a day, but yeah, for each 100 DMs, it takes about an hour to an hour and a half. Just depending on like if sometimes some days every single one you click has an Instagram page, so it's all good on Google Maps. Sometimes you click like 10 of them and you still can't find one with like an Instagram page that's active. So yeah, that's just how it is. So yeah, between like an hour and an hour and a half per 100 DMs. So it can take anywhere from like 3 hours to usually about 5 hours, the longest it's ever taken. That's sometimes if I'm distracted, but yeah, 3 to 5 hours is how long it takes to DMs. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's exceptionally boring and super annoying. And what I found is I can't really listen. Sometimes I can listen to stuff, but a lot of times if I listen to something in the background, then I just get distracted. Like I'll be listening to like some finance podcast, and I'll be like, oh yeah, what are bond rates right now? Okay, and then I'll just be getting distracted and just waste more time. So I basically have to not listen to anything so I can focus on it, which makes it really boring. But hey, again, it gets the job done. That's the point, right? Well, who cares if it's boring as long as you get leads in the long term, right? As long as if I stick to it and I do thousands of DMs, I'll get leads. Then that's enough. Who cares, about the rest of the stuff? But yeah, that's basically everything so far. Just doubling down on DMs, forgetting about the ads, reducing the price, and trying to just increase the number of clients that I have concurrently, so that I can use it as a stepping stone to get bigger clients. All right, so now that we're done with the all the stuff that happens in the business, now we're gonna get into all the random tangential topics. It's not gonna be as long as the last video. Probably gonna be a bit shorter. But yeah, the first one is, and this is one that I've kind of thought about a little bit, and that is, so what is the goal of like when, let's just say when I am viewing content, or let's just say what is the goal of when I am making these videos, right? Well, obviously one of the let's talk about the goal of what I'm doing when I'm making these videos, right? So when I'm making these videos, right, my goal is obviously to, one, document the progress and things that I've learned and lessons that I've learned, as well as what's kind of going on in the business and how I approach them at different times, right? For example, the way I approached price, 3 videos ago is obviously different than the way I approach price now, because the circumstances have changed. My perception of what is the reality has changed, and more things more things in the business have become known to me. So obviously things have changed, right? And obviously that'll go for everything in my journey. I like how right now my views on, let's just say, politics is obviously a lot different than what it was 5 videos ago, or when I back like last year or whatever it is, right? Now I believe that voting is politics in a general sense is honestly just, it's a non-productive, for the most part, it's just, it exists as an enabler of productivity, but not as a dictator of productivity, if that makes sense. But anyway, that's irrelevant. But the point is, my views change over time. So the point is, right, when I'm making these videos, for the average viewer, I think the point is that they should look at the ideas that I present in relation to their own objectives and adopt whatever maybe might help them to their own objectives or serve them, and then just disregard the rest. This is obviously how any content is already consumed. I just think, in a general sense, if you have that objective of, okay, whatever content I do consume, like in my perspective, whatever content I do consume, I will adopt any ideas or opinions or whatever that help me get closer to my objective, and I will disregard the rest. Right? I guess that's a very obvious thing, but I think putting it vocally crystallizes it, because a lot of times, sometimes you watch content, you don't know why you watched it in the first place, or you just watch a piece of content just for the entertainment value or something. But I think it's a better way to approach it as, okay, what am I going to take away from this and actually adopt so that it'll serve my goals, and I'll disregard the rest. So, something can have 99% of things that you don't agree with, but there's 1% that you might say, okay, hey, this is actually an interesting idea. Maybe I should implement that into my life. And even in a really shitty, maybe a video or a really shitty piece of content, you can still find something that is interesting and useful. Hopefully you don't feel that way about my content. Hopefully you think everything I say is obviously amazing. But anyway, that's besides the point. So, one thing I will say, okay, and this is kind of the next topic, and this is something I noticed, right? It is confusing local truths with universal truths. And this is a very interesting topic. Yeah, so this topic is one that actually will probably relate to a lot of people who are maybe, like, I guess, well, maybe not, because nobody's watching this, but it may relate to people who have consumed a lot of content, in the sense that a lot of modern discourse, it rewards obviously sensationalism, right? The goal is obviously to make the most sensational headline or most sensational topic or thumbnail or whatever it is, title, based on what has actually happened. That is just the reality, right? Like, it's not very interesting to say, like, okay, regulation and zoning laws cause housing to be housing supplies to be constrained, therefore it elevates the prices of housing. It's much more interesting to say, like, Generation Z will never have housing, or something, more sensationalized, rather than the actual, detailed truth and, like, the 46-page memo of what exactly the issue is and what are the incentives creating the issue. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, the point is, why am I getting into this? Well, there are many things that are satisfying for the human mind to see, right? And sometimes it's weird to, like, admit this, but humans really do love sensationalizing things. Even myself, when I see that, it is in a way, when you click on a video like that, it is satisfying to watch, because it feels important, right? Like the idea of relationships, or the idea of status, or maybe tragedies around the world, like wars happening, or people dying, or photos of a war zone, or something like that, or like opinions on certain things that are going on from different people and different perspectives. These things, they feel important and they feel satisfying to like scroll through and to look at and to watch, but in reality, they are largely irrelevant, right? And they're basically just like temporary things that exist in the local human little world, or local little tiny, like, it exists in a very in a low local tiny level, right? They're not universal truths. You see what I'm saying? Like, in the sense that, here are the things that are actually important, right? One of the most important things is that death is still one of the biggest unsolved constraints, right? Death and disease is one of the largest unsolved constraints. This is a universal truth, because if you solve death, you expand the scope and scale of productivity by hundreds and hundreds of times, right? Another big giant limitation is that many groups of people are incentivized to do things that are unproductive, right? In many different countries and many different places, even within the highest productive countries, there are many incentives to do things that are not productive. I guess that was a pretty bad example, because you could obviously say that for anything. But anyway, maybe that was a bad example. Let's just go back to the first example. Okay, death is still one of the largest unsolved constraints. Productivity is is something that expands, what life can do and all of that. But anyway, the point is, there are certain universal truths. I think I totally fucked this shit up, but I totally messed it up. Okay, you can sit down and blame me because you don't understand what's going on, because I can't explain it correctly. But the point is, right? There's a bunch of local discourse about all this junk, okay? And then there's universal truths about understanding and things that are actually mattering. Like, at the end of the day, sometimes as a human, you get too preoccupied with these local truths that you forget about the universal truths, okay? And this is a funny one, because this quote actually, so when I was a kid, when I was a few years ago, I'm still technically a kid, I guess, but by some people's measures. But anyway, the point is, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago, I read, obviously, Vagabond. Obviously, why did I say obviously? I read Vagabond. It's like a manga, but I remember there was one quote. I forgot most of the series, but I remember there was one quote that always stuck with me. It was, "Don't be so preoccupied with the leaf that you forget about the tree, and don't be so preoccupied with the tree that you forget about the forest." So what is that supposed to mean in practical terms? Well, what it means is that your attention is very valuable, right? If you are sitting down discussing local topics that are at local constraints, right, like a war or this political bullshit or this opinion on this person or whatever it is, you may not give attention to the things that truly matter, and that things that truly might help you become more productive in your life, and things that might help expand understanding for the entire universe, right? That's the point. And I guess I may have butchered it, like I said, but the point is, again, I keep saying this shit, but yeah, the point is, to understand and to stop, for me at least, this is a note to myself, is that before I do, let's just say, before I start scrolling or watching content, I don't have a bad habit of watching a ton of content or something, but it's just like when I eat or something, I watch something, or when I'm done with all my work, I watch like a interview or something like that. When I am watching whatever piece of content I am watching, I have to first understand, is this something that is actually, because your brain will not, like, it'll just be like, oh, that looks cool, let me click and enjoy watching. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, what is this political topic that this guy is talking about? What is his opinion? No, I don't agree with that. Oh, I agree with this. Is this a local truth? Like, is this something that matters on a really important universal level? Or is this just random junk discourse that tomorrow, one day this guy gets in a car crash, the next day that guy gets in a car? Is this like something that, you're going to forget about within 2 weeks? It's like, who gives a shit? You know what I'm saying? Within 3 years, nobody even freaking remembers 95% of the stuff that was on the news last, if you watch the news right now, okay, ask yourself 30 minutes later how much you actually remember from just 30 minutes later. Then ask yourself 3 years later how much you actually remember. There might be 1 or 2 events that you remember from the news cycle from like 3 years ago. So, I'm not like a big person of the news, but I'm just saying, in a general sense, a lot of this stuff is just basically pointless. That doesn't actually expand understanding. Again, everything is just relational to expanding productivity, right? And expanding our understanding. So yeah, focusing on the big things, deleting the local truths. The reason I keep saying local, I think this might be confusing, but local meaning, right, that local is really just a way for me to say things that are on the human level, or on like a social level, or things that matter, maybe seem to matter, but really don't matter on the grand scheme of things. In the sense that, does it really particularly matter, what is going on halfway across the world to you, or does it really matter what's going on halfway across the world, and will it really affect your trajectory in life? No, obviously, probably won't. Does it really matter in the grand scheme of like 100, 200, 300 years? Obviously not. What matters right now is just doing your absolute best to expand productivity, and basically just continue to understand, so that we can solve the biggest constraints limiting productivity and limiting understanding, right? That is the goal. It really, obviously, yes, the local situation does matter. If there's a fucking hurricane coming to you, you're not just be like, well, who cares about that? No, that's not what I mean. But the point is, most things don't, like, most local discussions and opinions about this topic or this debate or all of this, it doesn't actually practically matter to anything. Not to your life, nor does it matter to expanding productivity and the goal. So goal is to focus, stay focused, and be focused. Yeah. Okay. Next topic. All right, so we're going to get into the next topic. After the last topic, it's going to be really hard to discuss anything because everything is going to seem like a local topic now. So I gotta put myself in a box here. But anyway, this is actually a really interesting one. And yeah, technically it's like, it's a local discussion, but this is actually really interesting because once you kind of see what I'm trying to say, I don't know, I may be 100% wrong, but I feel like, okay, so it basically the core idea is that specifically consumer. So consumer financing is actually one of the root issues of every of the three, I would say, major problems that people discuss about, right? So what do I mean by that? Okay. So there's kind of like three major things that people complain about, right? It's like housing, okay? It's the cost of education, okay? Like the cost of housing, cost of education, and then the cost to of healthcare. Like if you get into like an accident or you have like you have a disease or some shit. Those are like the three main costs that people will like every political discussion will eventually come down to, oh, these three costs are really high, right? The cost of live in a place, the cost to get an education so you can have a job, and the cost if something happens or you get a disease or sick. Okay, so this is a pretty bold claim, but my claim is that consumer financing is actually the root issue of two of the three major problems. The third major problem, medical thing, is not really, but two of the three major problems are literally a direct issue because consumer financing exists. Okay, so first things first. Now, because I established this point, you have to define what consumer financing is. So, consumer financing and debt cycles is also part of this. I just fucked it up. But anyway, look, what is consumer financing? Consumer financing is when a consumer, right, like a person, goes to a store or goes to the bank or whatever it is to get a loan to buy a product, right? That could be a house, that could be getting a credit card, that could be an auto loan. You want to get your new car or whatever it is shit. You get an auto loan. That could be buy now pay later. That could be getting a loan, student loans. Student loans isn't consumer financing per se, but we just bucket it in. So consumer financing or financing for the individual is the root issue of all problems. Why am I saying this? Akil, are you crazy? What do you mean? How is it the root issue? Well, once you see what I'm saying, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But you might be completely wrong, and I might be. But anyway, so point is, look, housing. Let's just start with housing, right? Because I was a real estate agent. This is like my alley. You know what I'm saying? This is my alley. Okay, I was a real estate agent, so I got this. Okay, what I'm saying is this: you go back to the 1940s, 1950s, right? What are the major advents of suburban style housing? Right, like the single family house, nice big yard, okay? It's far as fuck from anything useful, okay? You have to drive. There's no way you could walk in a suburban neighborhood. You got to drive, right? This sort of housing, it's very constraining, obviously, but if you build this sort of housing in a city, right, it's obviously very constraining in the sense that it's not very high density, right? For the same, block of 5 houses that may be able to house maybe 20 people in those 5 houses, right? You might be able to build one apartment building that could house 200 people or something like that. But anyway, point is, in 1940s, 1950s, the whole suburban single family house became really popular, especially after World War II, right? And a big reason for that was the promotion and major, incentivization for people to use 30-year mortgages. 30-year mortgages and 15 years mortgages too, but 30-year mortgages, there was a major push, especially from the federal government, from federally insuring these mortgages to helping provide the mortgages and helping incentivize banks to provide the mortgages. There was a heavy incentive to provide mortgages. So why is that a bad thing, right? It's making people more affordable to buy a house. Well, fundamentally, on a base level, right, you are incentivizing a certain type of housing buying. It doesn't apply to any type of house. It applies specifically to single family. So that incentivizes families to buy single family houses, right? And that incentivizes builders to build more single family houses because more people want to buy the single family houses. And the single family houses are far cheaper than any other type of housing, or is very comparable because you could split up the payment into a 30-year payment, right? It's a very tiny monthly payment, especially at that time, for over 30 years. See what I'm saying? So that causes a lot of single-family housing to be built. But obviously the main problem with single-family housing is that it's not very dense. So when cities start to grow and populations start to increase, you can't just keep building single-family housing because it would be so far away from the city that nobody would want to live there, right? So the issue basically comes in is that by incentivizing, if you never had let's just say, a mortgage, right? If you never had the idea of mortgages, every single family house would have to be bought at cost, basically. It would have to be bought at a full cash price, right? And that would cause you to have to pay the exact amount that it would cost to build. In which case, it would be much cheaper to buy a unit in a condo or a unit in a multifamily building over buying a single family house. Only very few rich people would buy a single family house, right? Because it's very hard to maintain. It's expensive to maintain. Everybody already knows that. But also the cost to a builder, when you sell somebody like a single family house and it's a 30-year mortgage, that 30-year mortgage, like if it's an average person, they only have to have like much less amount up front, right? And they'll be able to afford theoretically a much higher level of house, like a single family house, when they should only be able to afford in cash, like a small condo or one unit in a multifamily building. So consumer financing basically exacerbated, or it increased the supply of single family housing. And that directly ties to today, where right now, basically, it's impossible to buy a house without, it's like, unless you're like mega rich. If you go to a major city like LA, most people buy a house with a mortgage. Even rich people like making 400, 500K per year still buy a house, whether that be in San Diego, whether that be in LA, they still buy a house, right, with a mortgage. It's like it's physically, it'd be exceptionally hard to buy a house in just all cash, right? Because structurally you locked in mortgages. But what does mortgages fundamentally do? All you're doing is just stretching the price point people will pay for a property, right? Because you're just expanding the buyer pool for a property. So it ends up expanding prices, which means everyone is forced to buy a house with a mortgage, right? Which then obviously creates an affordability problem, right? So basically what I'm trying to say is you can draw down basically, and then a lot of this is because, and a lot of this also, another major factor is that, so if you just took out a loan, okay, a 30-year loan, and this 30-year loan allows you to purchase this property. Once you pay off that loan, or even while you're in the middle of the loan, you don't want your value of your house to go down, obviously, because then you'd be underwater on your mortgage, or underwater after you paid all those years. You don't want to be underwater. You don't want to be losing money, right? So basically, that means you're going to never allow regulation around you. Obviously, this is called NIMBYism, but you're not going to ever be okay with regulation around you. Maybe like building a big apartment building next to you, or increasing the density in your neighborhood, or changing the look and feel of the neighborhood, because that would obviously contribute to a lower value on your property. See what I'm saying? So you could basically directly blame the housing issue to consumer financing, because if you never had financing in the first place, there would be no incentive to buy a single family. There still probably would be single family homes, but there'd be much smaller buyer pool, and more buyers would go towards the smaller, because the problem with single family homes and the problem with financing is you get to the maximum of the means. Like if you're a small family of, like, let's just say 3-4 people, you might go for a 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom house instead of just getting like a 1 or 2 bedroom house. Or a not house necessarily, but a 1 or 2 bedroom condo unit, or 1 or 2 bedroom multifamily unit in a multifamily property. See what I'm saying? You with consumer financing, you always expand your needs like as much as you can, because the monthly cost at the end of the day is much lower. So when that happens, you have a bunch of unused room. Okay, let's just say you only have 3 kids. You're going to buy, you buy in preparation of, because you have financing. You buy in preparation of, oh, I might have an extra couple kids. Let me buy an extra couple rooms. But basically, it's unused. It's extra maintenance. It's extra cost. It's a waste. It is a waste of space too, obviously, because you have basically and obviously when the kids grow up and leave, a lot of these old people are just stuck in a giant house. But it's still cheaper for them to stay in the house, because especially in California, they have like Prop 13 or whatever. So, or I forgot the exact proposition, but the property tax base stays significantly lower. It's only limited to 1% or whatever. So it's much cheaper. It's almost like it's basically free for them to stay in that house, compared to going into a more reasonable condo or anything like that. So essentially, it artificially constrains supply is basically what I'm trying to say. So you can basically in some way link all of the artificially constrained supply of housing to consumer financing, which is really prevalent, especially in the US and the Western countries, the 30-year mortgage, right? So if it was like, again, if you're buying in cash, you don't think that way. You think, okay, I'm going to be purchasing this giant thing in cash. I should be you're going to limit your means naturally, because especially if you're going to buy a car in cash or do anything like that, you're going to naturally limit your means. You don't want to like spend for something you don't particularly need. You see what I'm saying? You're going to try to limit your means just to save money. But consumer debt allows you to maximize, so it exacerbates the problem. Anyway, and then single family housing also creates obviously really long expanded out roads, which creates which forces everyone to have a car, which is an extra expense. And having everyone have a car actually decreases productivity because it makes everything slower to get to, right? You have to go through tons of traffic, right? Instead of just having a simple train or having it in walking distance. Car crashes are a huge leading cause of death. It's like 40 or 50,000 people die every year. And that's not even considering injuries. There's probably hundreds of thousands to millions of people a year getting injuries from car crashes. Pedestrian basically can't walk during car crash, with the car-centric city. Also, on top of that, because of the way car-centric cities are done. One is obviously you're gonna have more pollution and all that shit. But two, it also makes obesity a problem because people are walking less. If you go to Japan, people walk significantly more, so there's significantly less obesity. In America, people drive a lot more, so that's also one contributing factor. Not just food, but also activity. A lot of people in Japan don't necessarily eat the most healthy, but because they're constantly walking, they burn off those calories. But yeah, that is just the housing side, right? Now let's talk about like the what do you call it? The education side, right? So on the education side, right? Why is it so expensive to get a college education, right? It's like a lot of people walk away with like 30 to 50 grand in debt after their 4-year degree, and that's not even considering if you go to try to get a master's or you go to a private university out of state or something like that. It could get even higher. But a lot of people walk away with like 30 grand to 40 grand in debt, which is a decent amount of money to be in debt. Well, fundamentally, that comes down to the fact that, again, financing changes the rules, right? If everybody had to pay, if debt wasn't an option for college education, colleges wouldn't expand. Right now, because colleges essentially assume that everyone's going to get debt, right? All the major colleges are competing on amenities that raise their costs, so they have to raise tuition, right? It's not necessarily just the base education anymore. Anytime because they're trying to go towards the consumer, and the consumer is paying through debt, that expands the amount of options that they're willing to pay for because they're paying through debt. It's money that doesn't exist essentially, and that causes them to spend money on things that are not productive, or not necessarily directly causing productivity, which is like amenities, nicer rooms, more whatever random facilities or stuff like that, which obviously balloons the cost, which they need to pass on to the consumer through tuition, and then the consumer is an 18-year-old who just gets more into debt, right? And then the federal government essentially issues the debt, so you can't even bankrupt yourself out of the debt. But fundamentally, the entire issue is exacerbated by the fact that debt even exists in the first place. If you didn't have debt, you would constrain your options. Why would you pick the higher tuition that you're going to be paying out of cash when you can just pick the lower one right here in state that is not having all those amenities, but so the supply and demand would automatically cancel out any overspending on amenities because there's just not enough demand for something like that. See what I'm saying? But when there is demand via consumer financing, it expands the purchasing power, and then even the most average person is looking at it like, oh, well, I can either go to this community college or I can also just go to this really nice fancy college, and basically on paper, like to me, the cost is essentially the same because I'm just paying this small monthly rate, right? So they end up going to like a more expensive college. So that creates artificial demand for something that is not truly productive. You see what I'm saying? It is not productive to have extra fancy, like rooms or something in your college or whatever it is, because the main productivity engine of college is that you're learning subject matter in order to apply that into the real world, into the markets, right? The point of college is not to have a fancy experience necessarily. That's not to say that colleges should be like really terrible. But what I'm saying is that when you artificially increase somebody's purchasing power, they're going to end up purchasing things that may not necessarily be reflective of actual needs, right? And that just creates a debt spiral where there's more and more debt, and then it creates the factor that even if somebody wants to just get a basic degree, now because of all of the extra amenities that they have to add into the tuition, you're basically forced, just like with a house now, you're forced to get like a form of a consumer debt. The student loans, obviously, it's not necessarily the same consumer, but the point is you're forced to go into debt in order to get a tuition. So fundamentally, the issue arises directly because of debt being so promoted and debt being so available and accessible to people, right? And I'm not saying all debt necessarily is bad because you could argue that, and this is 100% true, that for businesses, debt is actually very good, right? Because for businesses with a proven business model, right? Like let's just say I'm Amazon, and in the early days, and I know that right now, if I build one warehouse and I start delivering packages from this warehouse in this city, that it's very profitable and I'm making money. well, I could do it the slower way and just take the cash flow from my current existing warehouses and put it into new ones and then grow that way, but it might take significantly longer. Or I can get debt to put in these profitable warehouses, and then I can pay back the debt with the cash flow. When I build 3 or 4 warehouses with the debt, I can immediately start paying it back with the cash flow that I have from all of that productive, profitable warehouses. But the issue is that consumer debt is not like that, right? And I'll give a really good example, and that is, this is very easy to see. It's called scope creep, right? This applies in housing because I was a real estate agent. I know that when a person is looking, like for example, when I work with a cash buyer, when I work with a financing buyer or a person who was financing, I actually have this because my first person was a financing. My second person was actually a cash buyer out of the 2 transactions that I did. So I can tell you it is different. But let's just say in a general broad sense, when you're doing with a financing buyer, generally they're going to be able to, they're not going to care as much necessarily about the purchase price as much as they're going to be able to, they're just going to care more about like kind of just maximizing what they can get within their monthly budget. You see what I'm saying? Which generally results, in my experience, from you just get a bunch of shit that you don't really end up needing, right? It's a scope creep, right? Like the scope of what you actually need expands because you artificially increased your purchasing power. So a really good example of this, is the real estate thing. People get extra bedrooms that they don't need, or they get an extra fancy renovated place that is not necessarily necessary, but they're significantly overpaying, but they're paying a monthly payment, so it's not a big deal. But another place this obviously occurs is in the car market, in the auto loan market. And the way you know this is because, let's just say you're going to go buy a new car, right? When you go to buy a new car, there are already standard add-ons that are added at the factory, right? That are just shoved into the purchase price. Why is that though? Why can't you just get a base model, super cheap car? Well, the truth is, when auto companies try to do complete base model stripped down cars, people say that that's what they want, but their buying habits are actually different because they walk in, they see the monthly cost, and they see, oh, well, this is an extra fancy, nicer car with a different type of trim. It's a more fancy trim. The engine might be a little bit louder. There's more space in the back. It's only an extra $50 or $60 a month. So then why would I go with the base car? I'll just go with the more expensive one. So the consumer financing dilutes the market in the sense, increases the purchasing power and changes the market in the sense that people are willing to spend extra money for things that don't actually matter, that are not necessarily productive. And what I mean is this: if you're spending an extra $1,000, right? Let's just say you're spending $1,000 extra on some fancy new paint. Okay, compare that to, let's just say you save that money, and let's just say, how productive of a use case is that extra fancy paint compared to $1,000? Let's just say that's spent on rail, for example. Like if like the $1,000 is spent on a railroad, when that railroad is built, right, that actually increases the amount of productivity, right? Because now multiple people use that railroad and are able to get back and forth. They're able to transport goods, whatever it is. So that $1,000 spent actually creates thousands and thousands of dollars, whereas this $1,000 spent on fancy paint, well, it looks cool for a couple of days, but it doesn't actually increase any productive value. And the entire industry built around giving this fancy, you're actually creating an industry based on nothing productive because you're spending $1,000 for fancy paint. The fancy paint guy, he has to actually supply the fancy paint. He has to have a special painter to paint the fancy paint. He has to have a special mechanism to actually paint that fancy paint. You know what I'm saying? They have to have a supply chain. There's an entire industry is created, right? Basically delivering something that offers zero productive value. You see what I'm saying? And you might be asking, okay, well, yeah, but if I hadn't spent the $1,000 on the fancy paint, it would just be sitting in my bank account. Right. But if it was sitting in your bank account, the bank would loan it out, right? And it might loan it out to a business who's, like I said, creating railroads, or it might be loaning out to a business who's building an apartment building. What I'm saying is, the point is, right? The point is that money that is spent on, when you do consumer financing, it ends up increasing the purchasing power, which ends up artificially putting money into things that are not necessarily value added or productive for society. You see what I'm saying? It's not a complaint. It is more just like it isn't nothing. Again, it's not bad or good. I'm just saying like a look at reality. This is what I'm seeing in the reality, right? And this kind of obviously exists for a lot of the whole auto industry, the dealership industry, essentially exists to make profit based on that arbitrage that people already know. When you walk into the dealership, you might be looking for a used Honda Civic, right? Let's just say, you're like an average person, you want to just get a nice, consistent commuter car. You walk into the dealership, you saw like a nice base model Honda Civic online, and it's like whatever, like 15, 20, or 25 grand, or whatever it is. I don't know the Honda Civic prices right now, but let's just assume it's like, it really does depend on the year, obviously, but let's just assume it's a 20 grand car. It's like a 2018 or 2019 Honda Civic, so it's like a 20 grand car. Okay, you walk in. Then I obviously don't know the fucking auto loan rates or whatever it is off the top of my head, but but it's a 20 grand car. Then they'll probably show you, a slightly nicer one too. Like, hey, you may as well just test drive this one. And then they'll show you the monthly price difference between this higher level one and the one that you test drove. And when you see the monthly price difference, and then you already test drove that nicer one, you kind of get like an emotional attachment to that nicer one. Even though the nicer one, what does it even mean? It's just, it might be a newer one. It might just have a little more leg room. It might just be like fancier seats, but it might cost, like, on paper, multiple thousands of dollars more. Like, actually, like a purchase price. So if you were going to pay $5 extra grand for like the fancier seats, would you do it? Absolutely not, out of cash. But because the fact that it's on a monthly payment, and over the monthly payment you might only be paying like $20 a month extra, then it feels like, oh, well, it's only $20 a month more. Who cares? Let me just buy it. I want the nicer one. I'm going to be driving a lot in this car, and you know what? I want to be comfortable. You'll just make that argument to yourself. You see what I'm saying? It'll seem rational, but it's irrational. Why would you pay $5,000 for slightly comfier seats? It doesn't make any fucking sense. You see what I'm saying? This type of thing is exacerbated, and obviously there's tons of add-ons. They'll give you like a set of like $50 floor mats, and they charge you $600 for it, or they'll charge you for like a car alarm, like $1,000 extra for a car alarm. It doesn't even make any fucking sense. But what I'm saying is, the point is this: when you add consumer financing to any market, right, whether that be housing, whether that be education, it ends up increasing the purchasing power, and then money goes to being spent on redundant, non-productive things, right? How much does, like, for example, like, how much does the extra amenities in a college actually matter to productivity? Almost nothing. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't help anybody do anything better. It's just a fancy item. You see what I'm saying? But because it's artificially propped up by financing, it exacerbates the problem for even the average person who just wants to get a college degree, right? They just want to get the basic college degree. They're basically forced to pay extremely high prices because tuition is propped up by the fact that consumer financing exists. Same thing with housing, same thing with auto loans and consumer debt. Credit cards are a big problem with this. In fact, a lot of the economy, because credit cards exist, is essentially elevated to a level where, because credit cards exist, you're essentially spending money on non-productive things. See what I'm saying? And when let's just say you have a credit card and you swipe it and you carry a balance. Now there's hundreds of dollars in interest that might be, or maybe thousands over the course of years, that might be going to interest that could have been going towards investments, could have been going towards savings so you can start a business or start something productively, but it's essentially just going towards interest. And I'm not saying these credit cards companies aren't productive. I'm just saying that money could have been spent in a more productive fashion rather than just giving interest. This guy gets a slightly bigger paycheck. He then spends it on a nicer car or something like that. It doesn't necessarily flow to increase productivity for everyone compared to saving it, and then maybe you end up starting like a business that actually solves a new problem or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Or even just investing it into bigger companies that are solving big problems. See what I'm saying? But anyway, how this is going to relate to the last one, which is healthcare. Well, obviously, nobody's purchasing healthcare with a loan necessarily. Well, obviously, some people do have like medical loans in the sense like after the treatment, then they have to pay by loan because they can't afford it. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, how does healthcare get affected by this, right? Okay, you established how housing costs and education costs, and then also obviously auto costs and all that stuff is very expensive now because of consumer financing and student debt. Okay, but what about healthcare? Well, healthcare, you see, if let's just say consumer financing and debt didn't exist and these were at normal prices based on actual productivity, healthcare wouldn't be as much of a cost. And what I mean is that the number on the price tag might still be the same, but because you're saving money here, it doesn't seem as expensive. Does that make sense? So, but because healthcare fundamentally, the reason the healthcare costs so much is not necessarily structurally due to scope creep, which exists in the housing market, and it also exists in the auto market and in consumer goods. That's scope creep is a lot of what drives up the prices in those markets. In the healthcare market, a lot of what drives up the prices are actually very logical things, right? Like, let's just start at the start. Let's just say you're like a drug manufacturing company, right? You're manufacturing a drug. Well, even just to start manufacturing a drug, you need to have FDA approval to do just to make sure your facility is good. You need to have, there's so much work in regulatory just to make sure one drug can actually make it into the market. You have to have tons of testing. You have to have approval by the FDA, of course. You have to have an entire QC department. You have to have a QA department. You have to have like a bunch of different departments just to make one small drug to the market consistently. And that's for good reason, right? Because throughout like history, people sold junk junk medicine and people got sick and died. So you don't want that happening. So you want it to be very regulated because people's lives are on the line. Okay, so but because of all this regulation, it costs a lot of money to do all of this stuff. It's not cheap to do all of this stuff. So they have to pass that cost on to the consumer, right, or to the medical facility, and the medical facility specifically, they also have tons of costs. Doctors are not cheap, nurses are not cheap, and the cost to actually hold open all these beds, to stay under, again, regulatory frameworks, like approval, on every single level, the costs add up and add up and add up and add up. And obviously that has to be passed on to the consumer in some way, obviously. You see what I'm saying? And people will like argue like, okay, government healthcare will solve this. But the fundamental basis is that, okay, there's a limited resource, which is high quality medical care. Okay. It doesn't matter at the end of the day who's paying for it, right? Whether that be like you or the government or whatever. At the end of the day, there's a limited amount, right? So whether it be, let's just say like you're going to be going to get a treatment done. If the government is paying for it, they're incentivized to they're incentivized to put you towards, the cheaper treatments and stuff like that. And anything that is really, really expensive is obviously probably not going to be covered, or they're going to say, hey, no, or you're going to have to really prove to any government that's really required for you to survive. In our market, obviously, you're just doing that. You're dealing that with insurance companies rather than the government. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, it's a limited resource, right? And there's so much regulatory burden that in order for them to make a profit, they need to price it at this certain price. And obviously, your life is on the line, so you're going to be willing to pay any price, right? Obviously, and once you get any treatment done, obviously, it's going to be a big price tag. This is just my dad worked in a CAR T therapy company, and just I think one dose of the CAR T treatment was like $400,000 or $500,000, and that might sound like a crazy number, but the amount of work. Because like my dad was in the QC department, but the amount of work that goes into just one of these things, the amount of machines, right? Like the lab setup, one lab setup, the machines are so expensive and advanced. Like even one machine costs like the amount of a car. It costs like 30, 40, 50 grand, not including like repair costs. And you have like columns and stuff that you have to constantly replace that cost thousands of dollars. So even just to maintain a lab, it costs millions of dollars just to maintain the lab, just for testing and development. And you have to have a clean room facility, right? With special like air cooling and stuff like that. So there's no particulates that come inside. It has to be, everything has to be done in a very specific way. Right, and with if any mistake happens, a person's life is on the line. So there's no compromises. Especially the FDA, especially will not they'll not be like, they're not going to pass something that is not passable. You see what I'm saying? So once you factor in all the costs, and obviously having like somebody like all these people, this is a very laborious process. So you're gonna have to hire educated scientists, which obviously costs money. These people are not free. They're not freely working. They cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries, millions of dollars just to keep the equipment, and then obviously all the legal work. And just everything costs a lot. So at the end of the day, yes, because the CAR T therapy is like they take your blood out, they have to keep it in like a proper temperature. They have to bring it all the way back to the lab. They have to do their stuff. They have to do all the work, make sure it's all perfectly clean and good. Then they have to return it back to you and then put it back in. So think about how many people are involved in that process. And then that's not even considered the doctor. The doctor has to get paid to inject and all, to do all the stuff. So it's not a cheap process. Obviously, it costs that much money. There's no way to skin the cat differently where it doesn't. It's a very laborious process, right? Which is why it costs so much money. But that's not scope creep. That's just the reality of a limited resource that is very hard to acquire, right? But yeah, so that's the reason that medical costs are obviously high. And the point is, if consumer debt and housing costs and education costs weren't so high, right? If they weren't so artificially elevated with consumer financing, then the medical costs would obviously still be high, but they would not, in context, you'd be saving a lot more money, so you'd be able to afford those medical treatments much, much better. See what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, basically what I'm saying is consumer financing is the root of all evil. But anyway, it just changes the incentives. Because it changes the incentives, basically every company involved, it is forced to, otherwise they'll go out of business, go expand their scope, right? The cars become more expensive because people think at a monthly rate. So they have to expand their scope and add all these add-ons in order to make money. Otherwise they won't make money. Houses, people are interested in single family houses because they're interested in paying that mortgage rate for the single family house. And that causes people to build more single family houses at the time. And that causes now constrained housing supply, which means prices go up. but people who own those houses don't want anything multifamily or multi-level or more than one unit built near them. So that causes, obviously, again, artificial constrained housing supply, which makes prices go up. So fundamentally, though, the root issue is that consumer financing is somewhat of the root. It's a main portion of the root issue, whether that be housing or all the other stuff that I talked about. Anyway, I repeated myself quite a bit, but yeah, I hope you got the point. I hope I kind of broke it down kind of well. But yeah, that's consumer financing. All right, next topic. So this next topic is equally as, I guess, interesting, but I guess it's a very multifaceted one. I'll try to get into as much detail as possible. But yeah, it might be a long one. That I mean, I understand it, but to convey it, it might be a lot of words. But okay, here's the point. Okay, so my question was, I was like talking with chat, and I was trying to like ask myself, okay, wait. I always say, right, my like shorthand is that morality, right? What is like morality, right? Morals, like the what you consider good or bad, or the way you make decisions, is fundamentally, I always believed that morality is downstream of a goal, right? Like morality only makes sense in the frame of an objective, right? Like if my goal was to be the greatest general of all time or something, my morality would obviously be different than if I wanted to be the greatest saint, right? You see what I'm saying? Like the greatest general might be okay with waging war because he wants to accomplish his goal, right? And that would be within his morals, because his goal is to become the greatest general. Whereas the greatest saint would have a completely different set of a moral code, because his goal is to be the greatest saint. You see what I'm saying? So morality fundamentally is downstream of a goal, right? So my question was, what does immorality what does it mean fundamentally if the goal itself is understanding and expanding productivity, right? So what is my goal? My goal is to understand the nature of the universe. What does that mean? Right? I'll give a quick recap. What does that mean is that my goal is to understand why anything exists at all, right? And it's not just for me personally, necessarily selfishly. Obviously, I do obviously want to know, but the goal is just to expand understanding as a whole. Because maybe in my lifetime I will never understand, and maybe we will never be able to transcend apism and stop death in my lifetime. But my goal is to push forward towards that as much as possible within my lifetime, towards understanding and productivity, right? Expanding productivity. So if that is the highest if that is my highest goal, how does morality what does moral even mean compared to that, in relation to that goal, right? Because the thing is, and what I kind of noticed is that productivity might actually be the most conventionally moral goal you can have. And the reason I say that is because what is productivity, right? So it really depends on how you define productivity. Because if you define productivity as just GDP or just moving money around, then you would say that, oh, even gambling is productive because it moves money around. But fundamentally, it is not productive. Gambling is not productive, because gambling might make money in the short run, right? Like I might be able to, let's just say I was a casino owner. I might be able to hook a bunch of people to come into my casino, and they'll be able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars at my casino and lose it. They'll be losing all the money, but I'll be gaining all the money. But is that is me making money, and that is productive? Maybe I'm making money, but is that actually productive? Like, does that actually expand understanding? And the answer is no, because for every $1,000 that is lost at a casino, right? That is not let's just say $1,000 lost at a casino versus $1,000 invested into, let's just say again, building a railroad, right? When the railroad is complete, compared to when the casino is running for 10 years, the railroad transfers hundreds of thousands of people every single day. It helps facilitate travel in between the city. It helps save time. It helps save money. It helps people get from point A to point B. It helps facilitate many shops and businesses around the area. It helps people who are in underserved regions help to get to more economically higher opportunistic regions. So when you're considering productivity, if you consider long-term productivity, like on an infinite time scale, then actually, even though maybe in a short term casino might be productive, it is actually not productive. So why I'm saying that productivity is actually might be one of the conventionally highest. What do I mean by conventionally highest moral? Well, when you ask the average person what is like good or bad, they'll be like, oh, obviously war is bad, and saints are good, or whatever, giving to the homeless is good, or whatever it is, right? But if you look at long-term productivity means the rise in output, right? The rise in productive output from everyone over the long term. which takes into account humanity, because in order to be productive, you must take into account humans. You cannot, productivity is not in a vacuum, right? I'll give you an example. So what I mean is this. Let's say you're hiring a worker, right? What is the most productive we can make this worker? Is it making this worker work 100 hours a week? No, because in the long term, that worker will burn out. They won't be satisfied with the job. They'll feel like we're overworking them or not compensating them fairly or whatever it is. So that is not productive. What is more productive is allowing this worker to have having this worker work on something meaningful, right? Something that they like doing for an amount of time per day, probably like 6 to 8 hours, that where they're high in output, right? And then they get to have and it's 5 days a week, so they get to have like 2 days to rest, recuperate, and get back. And they obviously have vacation, so they're able to reset their mind and come back more productive. That is actually the most productive, because for a human, in the long term, if let's just say this human sticks with you for 30 years, this human is able to work and help your company and help themselves and everybody in the world become better over 30, 40 years. Instead of trying to burn them out and work, it's not productive to do that. See what I'm saying? What is productive actually takes in humans and their values and their goals in the long term. So if you look at long-term productivity, not like short-term, let's revenue maximize, let's work everyone to the bone and then not deliver good products. That's not what I mean. If you think about long-term productive, it helps everybody, because the workers feel compensated. The service that you're delivering helps somebody, solve their problem. Okay? Then once they're able to solve their problem, and obviously you get a profit, so you're able to invest in solving more problems, right? And then you're able to help hire more people that want to work for you and help contribute to the goal, and they become more productive over time. And basically you solve problems within the company, right? So let's just say a worker is at the front desk, right? They're spending 8 hours there just answering basic questions. Well, in a vacuum, it might seem like if you put down a kiosk, an automated kiosk, that this worker is now replaced and they can be let go. But actually, this person kind of does hate the job, but instead, they're now managing multiple kiosks and they handle edge cases, which they find more productive. They get paid more for, right? Because they're not just doing mundane work anymore. Now they're doing higher leverage work, right? And right at the end of the day, the consumer is happier. I'm not saying that all kiosks everywhere are good. Obviously, there are many examples of self-checkout being far worse than the actual thing, and there's no human connection and all this shit. That's not what I mean. The point is just when you solve problems internally and externally, the point is not necessarily to remove humans from the picture or something like that. The point is to expand productivity, which means improving the skill sets of everybody in the process, whether that be like the individuals that work for you or whatever it is, and delivering better services. All of that information, all of those people are served better in the long term of expansion of productivity. So getting to the point, the definition of the term of productivity can be misconstrued very easily. Because like when you say expand the scope and scale of productivity, the point is productivity actually encompasses error correction, innovation, truth seeking, solving problems, taking human limitations into account, and factoring for those limitations. A worker is more productive if they're able to take a vacation. A worker is able to think about, like, let's just say for me, on my perspective, if I work 10 hours a day, I will actually be less productive at the end of the week than if I just work like 6 or 8 hours a day, get what's productive done, and then I'm able to think through ideas to help make me not necessarily work less, but just make me work better, right? Like, for example, I could work a gajillion hours, on the ads or whatever it is, but if that actually is not going to move me forward at the end of the day, then what was the point of doing it? It doesn't matter how many hours you work. You can kind of see this like when you compare sometimes in Japanese companies compared to American companies. The Japanese companies, they work for maybe hundreds of hours a week of the average worker, but the actual output at the end of the day is far less than a worker in an American company that might only work 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Why is that? Because the 6 hours a worker 5 days a week is actually able to think about better solutions to the problem, rather than sometimes in Japan, people just show up to work. They just stay there at work longer than their manager or whatever it is, just to please their manager, or they stay there working on stuff that can be automated, or just to show that they're working harder. But in the reality is, the point is output, long-term productivity, long-term output. Not necessarily like the short-term, I maximize my work. Like, that doesn't make any sense. See what I'm saying? So the next point is how does that actually relate to morality? Well, morals kind of get into a decision. What is a moral decision? Because it kind of gets into like the perspective of intent versus like the effect of the decision that you made, right? And the problem is that you can't say 100% that it is intent, because if somebody intended to do something bad but something good happened, then are they a bad person? Or what? You can say the same thing reverse. If they intended to do something bad and then something good happened, is that like, you see what I'm saying? It's hard to judge it as a moral or immoral thing. So it's kind of like a dichotomy of like, okay, intent does matter to a degree, but more importantly, what matters is error correction, right? And decisions towards a set goal, right? And being able to adapt, even if, let's just say your intent was to do an action towards a goal, right? And then the effect of that was negative. Like you intended to, you intended to solve a problem, but the problem ended up not being solved and actually got worse, right? So either right there you can say, you can only judge the effect and say everything I did is wrong and that means I'm immoral, or you can judge it as I did an action towards a goal that was incorrect. I will now error correct, solve that, and try again, right? That is the correct way to do it. So basically the intent versus effects, it's kind of a balance between both, I guess you could say. Okay, so then another problem is like, this obviously does not apply to like the individual level, but on a society-wide level, right? For example, in World War II, the decision to like firebomb Tokyo, for example. I would argue America is probably the most like long-term productive type of society. Generally, like en masse, it is probably one of the more moral societies. Obviously, like again, no country is perfect, but en masse, like obviously, people will like point to like Vietnam and many things like, okay, Americans are not obviously perfect. No country is perfect, but en masse, Americans did do like way better. For example, like after they helped a lot in reconstructing Germany and a lot of Europe after it was destroyed. They helped in the reconstruction of Japan. And, in a general sense, one could say that America tends to be on the more moral side of things. As far as compared to my goal for productivity, they tend to be on the more expansion of productivity side of things. So another issue that comes up with morality is what if an atrocity, like for example the firebombing of Tokyo that killed hundreds of thousands of people, or obviously you could also say the nuclear bombs that were used, but firebombing of Tokyo actually killed more people than that. But at what point is an atrocity, is that immoral, or is that a required outcome for productivity, right? For example, if instead of firebombing Tokyo they had to do a land invasion, that would have been far worse, right? Because way more people would have died. So the problem is, unfortunately, that sometimes in life, there's only, you have to pick from a bad bunch of decisions, right? Like for example, the U.S. leadership at the time, they didn't have much of a choice. Basically, you're in a war, right? You have to subdue the enemy, right? And there's not really an easy way to do this. And either you do the bombings, or you have to do a land invasion, which could be 10 to 100 times worse. So again, there's no way to look at it in certainty. There is no such thing as certainty. That's kind of like the next point, is that when you are making a decision towards an objective, there's not necessarily a form of certainty that this is actually the right decision, right? Unfortunately, you're just gonna have to make the decision. You're gonna use error correction, and you're gonna have to use the better judgment of people around you to hopefully correct your errors. And at the end of the day, you just have to make a decision and then go with it. And at some points, there is such a thing. It is the last resort option, but there is such a thing as a productive atrocity. But it is obviously not. It is not a common occurrence. It is a very rare situation. Like the bombings in World War II. There, like or capturing Berlin or something like that. The push for Berlin. Right. On the Soviet side, that was definitely done in a pretty immoral way. But in a general sense, certain things unfortunately had to happen. Right. There are certain things that have to happen, and unfortunately, you could consider it a productive atrocity. Obviously, not the Soviet side. Again, a lot of the stuff they did was a little too far. But what I'm saying is, certain things needed to be done because they needed to be done. And it was kind of bouncing around at times. But the next thing I kind of thought about was, okay, I noticed that if let's just say you have an objective, right? And you let's just say you have a desire to, like, I don't know, do something like probably not that smart. That is obviously against your goals. Maybe like, I don't know, like overeat or something when you're supposed to be on a diet, right? But if your goal is to be like fit at some point, right? You know that eventually you'll probably, forgive yourself and move on for overeating that day. But then that also creates kind of like a paradox. Like, okay, if I know that I'm going to forgive myself, then I'm going to do it and then forgive myself. You see what I'm saying? It creates like a weird incentive. But the point of that is that paradox will kind of like always obviously exist. But the point is that it is not actually permissible to do it that way. What I mean is that it is the antithesis of your goal. If your goal is what you say it is, right, and you're allowing yourself to do permissible destruction towards the goal, I hope I explained that correctly, then you don't actually have that goal. You see what I'm saying? So basically the point is you have to be strict. You have to have strict requirements for your goal and strict decision-making frameworks. But if you happen to make a misstep by mistake, that is truly by mistake, right? Or something you had not considered before, then you obviously forgive yourself and then correct to it. Again, like if you had a diet and then you overate one day, right? It does not mean that the end of your diet, or it does not mean that that was okay per se. It just means that you're going to say, okay, hey, I shouldn't have done that. I did do it. At the end of the day, I have to move on. I have to get back to my diet. That's the only way forward, right? And that is a lot different than saying, I will forgive myself later, so I'm just going to overeat right now. You see what I'm saying? They're kind of different things. You're going to be strict before, forgiving after, but only obviously if it's actually truly like an accident or something, that you weren't really thinking straight. You're not taking the action because you believe you're going to forgive yourself. You're taking the correct actions, and if you deviate by mistake, then you correct it, make sure that doesn't happen again, and then get back to your goal. I hope that makes sense. Another thing with morality is that the cost of doing something wrong scales with the amount of leverage that you have. For example, like the average person, or even me, for example, like right now, if I make a mistake, like let's just say again, I overeat, or I do something stupid, or I get mad at somebody, or obviously this hasn't happened, but let's just say I get really mad and I write a hateful comment, right? Obviously that does nothing to anybody. Maybe the person reads it, they get upset for a minute and they move on. But in a general sense, it doesn't really do anything like of meaningful value. But obviously I haven't done that. I'm just saying as an example. But as you have more and more power, more and more leverage, for example, let's just say like you're an official in a government institution or something, I don't know, or you're like, like the president. And if he really hates somebody, he could do like a small action that could potentially destroy that person's life. Even though like for him, the small action is just like writing a thing, like something to like destroy his job or something. And on me, it's just like, writing a comment or something. Obviously two completely different, like same emotion, completely different scales of results, right? One completely destroys somebody's life. Another, just is nothing. See what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is the cost of being wrong, like the more and more leverage that you get over time, the more and more morality, essentially, the decisions you make have to be towards your objective, right? Because the cost of being wrong is significantly higher, right? Because you could have downstream effects that are so bad because of your decisions. And I'll give you a perfect example. Wilhelm II, right? I'm sure a lot of people don't know, or maybe probably a lot of people do know, but the point is Wilhelm II is essentially, you could basically attribute most of modern history to his failures as a leader, right? Because if you don't know who Wilhelm is, basically he's the guy he was like the prince or the king or whatever. He was what do they call it? The chancellor of Germany or whatever it is. But he was the chancellor of Germany or whatever it is. The leadership is, maybe that's not the word for it, but he was like basically the king of Germany, and basically was a major push for them going into World War I. He tried to back out at the end, like right before World War I started, but basically his decisions were a major contributing factor to World War I essentially happening. And basically Bismarck, the person who basically was a major pivotal role into turning like the Prussian Empire into a full Germany through like three or four smaller wars to actually consolidate Germany into a real country. He was actually forced out by Wilhelm II, and even like Wilhelm I and Wilhelm I's son essentially were more in line with Bismarck's thinking that there's a lot of things that Wilhelm did, like pushing out, Bismarck and alienating France and Russia and stuff like that, that really essentially forced World War I into a potential possibility. And really, you can put a lot of his incompetence as the main reason, and a lot of it was basically ego, right? He surrounded himself with yes men and stuff like that, and a lot of it was ego. And Germany was very successful, and arguably, if World War I and World War II never happened, Germany might actually be the main number one country in the world because of the scientific, technological, and economic things that were going on in Germany at the time. Germany could be the number one country. I might be speaking German right now if Wilhelm was actually smart. But the point is, his lack of intelligence, right? Because like I said, morality scales with leverage. His lack of intelligence essentially caused World War I. After World War I, obviously, he lost power, and the Weimar Republic became the thing. And then because of that situation, the total basically destruction of Germany. And at the same time, in Russia, there was basically a civil war going on, and the Bolshevik uprising that seeded for Stalin and Hitler, two of the most deadly people of all time, to kind of come to power. And that caused World War II, obviously, which you can date a lot of the current struggles basically back, even like North Korea existing is basically in part because of because North Korea is in part because of the Soviet Union. Same with Cuba, and a lot of the modern day like a lot of the modern day is basically formed because of the decisions made at that time. So after World War II, obviously, you had the entire, like genocides and, many different things that happened on the Soviet side too. They had their own famines and stuff like that. And obviously, the Nazis did what the Nazis did. But yeah, there was a lot of, obviously, at the end of World War II, Europe was left in tatters. Communism spread to China as well. And just basically, none of that would have happened, obviously, if Wilhelm was more competent. But it did obviously happen, and he was incompetent, which caused a lot of modern history and a lot of atrocities because of his basically negligence or incompetence. But the point is, morality scales with leverage. So the amount, the cost of being wrong is infinitely higher in Wilhelm's position than it is at like some random kid in Germany's position. You see what I'm saying? All right. So then okay. So then the point is, can you summarize an individual just reducing it to their actions? Right? Is an individual simply just actions? Well, the problem is that an individual en masse can be really good while individually making a bad action. For example, like let's just say like en masse, Martin Luther King was a great person who stopped segregation or whatever. But he may have done certain things at times that people may consider immoral, or people, I don't know. I'm just saying as an example. I don't know what the fuck. I don't want to be bad mouthing anybody, but I guess I can talk about Gandhi, for example. Gandhi en masse tried to free India, but as I talked about before, he definitely made certain bad decisions that maybe he didn't know about. But at the end of the day, is he an immoral person for that? Or at the end of the day, you really can't say necessarily. You cannot purely say that an individual is just their actions and the effects of the actions, and you purely can't say an individual is just purely intent. But en masse, you can say that an individual's actions can contribute to a lot of good, but they can make individually immoral or bad decisions at an individual basis, and maybe they correct them and fix it. But the point is that you cannot necessarily reduce an individual to just actions and effects. Not always, or not really at all, because then a really good person can basically do bad things at the same time because they're really good. It compensates for the bad, but that's not necessarily the case. Do you see what I'm saying? So the point is, you can judge individual actions. You have to take these basically by a circumstantial basis. A person can be good en masse, but individually made bad actions at certain points of their life, right? So I guess that's the individual versus action thing. Okay, final couple things. So one last thing was how you have to define an objective for morality to make sense, right? And what I mean is that a lot of morals, right, are really just like social norms at the time. You see what I'm saying? Like if you go back 500 years ago, the social moral, like slavery was completely socially moral, and almost every society did it. Child marriage was very like a small lady, like what do you call it? Like a very young lady marrying an old guy was completely socially moral and acceptable. But obviously now that's not the case, and slavery, of course, now is completely universally frowned upon. So morals, if without a defined objective, end up being especially in society today and in most things, morals just end up being what the mass thinks at that time, right? And it's more of like a social conditioning framework rather than an interpretation based on an objective, which is honestly the worst way to do morality, because then it becomes about, because like in the social format, it just becomes about whatever everyone socially agrees is moral, and then people will emotionally defend that argument, even if it's not related to an actual objective. They might be defending an argument about something like morally good, but it might be stupid, like slavery, for example. It's really stupid in hindsight. Like it's actually economically worse because people are forced to work, so they're not actually able to solve problems that they want to. But the point is, at the time it was considered moral, but it's actually very, very dumb. But if you at least have an objective, you can objectively say, hey, it is immoral because it does not expand productivity in the long term. Slavery might be in the short term, it might, you might be able to extract these people and force them to work, so it might seem productive, but in the long term, you're losing out on, one, bad conditions for the slaves, two, these people are not actually being able to creatively solve problems, they're getting worked to the bone, so you're wasting labor. And there's many, many problems with slavery that are not productive and don't contribute to the long-term productive objective, is what I'm trying to say. But the point is, morality should be viewed in the lens of in relation to an objective, rather than in relation to what other people think. So to kind of summarize, for me personally, what does morality mean? Morality means how can we objectively expand the scope and scale of productivity in the long term, right? With not necessarily, because again, the individual like me can have a incorrect interpretation of what actually expands the scope and scale of productivity in the long term. So the goal is to always be surrounded by people who can error correct and correct your judgment towards actually expanding the scope and scale of productivity, right? You don't want to surround yourself by people who just constantly like agree with whatever you say. You want to have error correction, right? But again, it has to be contributory to expanding productivity and understanding. Otherwise, if they have a completely different goal, like they want to, I don't know, burn the world or something, it's going to be that's not useful error correction. The point is having truth seeking towards understanding, and yeah, so that's basically it's an attempt to be as truth seeking and focused on the objective in the long term as possible. That's what essentially morality means to me. All right, so yeah, we talked about a lot of different topics. I know that was a long one, especially the morality one, and especially with morality, it's so dependent on it's not necessarily like there's no definition that you can really give specifically for. It's not a universal definition. It is a definition based on like the scope of what your objective is, the definition on how you define it in relation to other people and all of that shit. So it's not like a clear, okay, here's a clear cut, this is what it is to be moral, this is what it is not. It really depends a lot on many different factors and the circumstances that you're in. For example, like I said, in World War II, there are certain things that, like, in a vacuum, obviously you'd say bombing is immoral. But certain times, like in World War II, that is the only way to, to survive or to create productivity or to do anything, right? So, again, moral is really dependent on the circumstances, the goal, and everything like that. But yeah, that's kind of conclusion of that topic. But yeah, that's basically the entire video. We talked about everything that's happened since the last video, all the DMs and everything, and me stopping the ads, all of that. We talked about how consumer financing is the root of all problems, and we also talked about like the local truths. The local truths being like, it feels good to kind of get sucked into the local truths, but it's important to be focused on the universal truths. We also talked about obviously the consumer financing thing, and how a lot of major problems or issues that the modern society likes to complain about and talk about, that are real structural issues, I guess, are related to or because of or exacerbated by consumer financing. And then we also talked about the idea of morality and how it is obviously dependent on the goal and all those other factors that we discussed. So yeah, that's the entire video. Thank you. And then next video, or what I'm looking forward to next week, hopefully I can get more trials. That's obviously the goal. It's always the goal. But this time I really hope I can, kind of just obviously keep it at a lower price, but get concurrent clients, so that if I get concurrent clients, right, that I'm doing myself at like $500, $600 a month, then I can offload the task, right? If I get like 3 or 4 at once, then I can finally offload it to another person. If I can finally offload it to another person and everything stays running and the metrics are good and conversions are still good for like a month or two, then I can use that data and I can start reaching out to bigger spas, bigger clients, and I can just directly approach them with, hey, look at the data that we have. If we run this for you, you'll generate X% more revenue, blah, blah, blah. We can run the free trial for you for 2-3 weeks so you can see. And I'll be, obviously, because it's a bigger client, I'd be willing to do a longer free trial period. And then they could, we can go from there. And it'll be easier in. I can actually literally show them a live dashboard with real recordings live while people are messaging and the VA is messaging, and it'll just be so much better if I actually have concurrent clients. Otherwise, I can't really show a live dashboard or anything if I'm the one making calls and I'm the one doing it. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that's the entire video for this week, for this month. Hopefully I can, again, just get more trials. That's the goal. So yeah, expand the scope and scale of productivity, keep pushing, and onward.